Hello everyone, and my name is Gaurav, and I welcome you on this channel named Geeks for Geeks School. So this is what we are going to develop today in the web lab on code.org. So it's a pop-up chat window. Fine, and if you will hit this button over here, nothing. So this is a window which you are going to see. Fine, this is a chat window you will get to see. Just a second, let me refresh this link one more time. Okay, now when I will access this web page. Okay, so these are the three lines which will be visible to us, getting reflected right on the top, and there is a button which is there present right at the bottom of the page. Now if you will hit this button, nothing is going to happen. Fine. Why? Because I have some JavaScript code which I need to fire on this browser for making this button work. How can we fire this JavaScript code? We need to press Ctrl, Shift and J together, and automatically the console box is going to open up like this. Okay, now some error is getting reflected right on the top over here. If you want to eliminate this thing, you just have to hit this clear console button. Automatically everything is going to disappear. Now we can paste this code which I copied from here over here in this console log. Fine. Now let's hit this button and see what is going to happen. So now this chat box is appearing on this browser. So this is what we are going to design today in the web lab on code.org. Let's dive into the platform and check out how can we create a dynamic pop-up chat window using basic HTML, CSS and JavaScript coding. So first of all, I need to access my account which I have created with this ID. Okay, and then for accessing web lab, we need to hit this create button present right on the top of this beautiful page. Now we can hit this view all projects. So again it will redirect us on a beautiful page. We need to come down and hit this view full list option. So this is where you will get to see the web lab option. When you will hit this, you are going to get redirected on a beautiful environment where you can define the HTML and CSS codes. And it will be great if you can just share the link of this video in your groups so that more and more students can come and join this lecture and enjoy the coding which I am going to do now on this beautiful code.org platform. Okay, so we have this text which is getting reflected right on the top over here. So first of all, we need to define the required HTML code with which we can get this kind of thing reflected over here on the stage area. So what I will do, let's make use of the header tag. Okay, just a second. Yeah, now it is fine. So I am going to copy this whole text and place it in between these two header tags. So now this pop-up chat window is appearing over here on this beautiful stage area. Now what else do we have besides this text? We have this line also. So again I'm going to copy this whole thing and put it over here, and let's enclose it in between the paragraph tag. So because it is a container tag, so that is the reason we need to define the start on element also and off tag also for this particular element. Fine, let's now do the same thing for this third line too. I am copying it from here and I am now pasting it over here. Let's enclose it in between the paragraph tags. Okay, so now we are able to see all the 3 lines getting reflected on this stage area. Fine. Now besides this, we have a button. You know, when you will refresh this page, so this is what the user is going to come across. So he will see these 3 lines getting reflected right on the top, and besides these 3 lines, he will see a button right at the bottom of this web page. So let's now define the required HTML code for this button over here. So for getting this button on the stage area, we can make use of this tag named button. Fine, and let's define a class also for this button. So I am defining open button. Okay, for this button which the user will see initially when he will come on this page. Besides this, I would like that when the user will click the button. Okay, now what is happening when the user is clicking the button? Let me copy this JavaScript code again and run it over here in the console panel. So when the user will hit this button, automatically a function will be called up, because of which this button will get converted into this pop-up chat window. Fine. So we need to link a function to this button over here. So let's define a function for this property onClick. So onClick is for if the user will click this button. It is for this condition. Okay, so I am going to make use of open form. So this is the name of the function which I would like the browser to call when the user will hit this button with class name open button. Okay, and now let's close this button tag and write down something inside these button tags. So what do we have on the head of this button? Chat is getting reflected on the top of this button. So let's write down chat over here, and as you can see, we are able to see this text getting reflected on the top of the button. Done with defining the required HTML code for this button. Now when the user will hit this button, automatically this is the chat box which is going to appear. Now we have to define the required HTML code for creating this kind of window. Let's do that quickly. So the first thing that I would like to do is I would like to define a separate division section. Fine. For the pop-up chat window, and let's define a class for this division section with which we can access all the components we are going to define inside this division section, and then we can customize the appearance of all the components by putting some CSS codes on those components. So I'm going to define a class with name chat popup for this division section, and besides this, let's define an ID also for this division section. So you know, there are 2 ways you can call this division. One with the help of this class name, and the second with the help of the ID name. So I am going to make use of this ID, my form, for this division. Okay, now because it is a kind of form, right, on which there is a message text area, then there are 2 buttons, then there is you know, some text which is getting reflected right on the top of this pop-up window. So that is the reason I would like to make use of form tag, right, because it's a kind of form. And then we can, you know, define a class for this form. So I would like to define a class with name, let's say, form container. Fine. Okay, so we are done with defining the required code for the form thing. Now let's define the HTML code for getting these components over here on the stage area. So the first thing is this chat text, right? So I am making use of h1 tag and writing this chat inside these two h1 tags. So as you can see, chat is now getting reflected over here on the stage area. Now the next thing that I would like to define is the HTML code for this message text. So for this one I am going to make use of label tag. For then we can make use of this MSG. Fine, and then we can, because it is in bold, so that is the reason I'm making use of this bold tag and putting this message in between the bold tag so that I can see it getting reflected in bold fonts over here on the stage area. Once so we are done with defining the required code. Let's close this label box, and now you can see this message is getting reflected over here on the stage area, right? Now there is a text area which is present just below this text. So because the user can type over here his message, and we need to connect this text area with this text over here. So for doing that, what we can do, we can first make use of this text area tag for getting a text area over here on the stage area. Besides, there is some text which is getting reflected inside the text area which says type message. So for getting it reflected inside the text area, we can make use of this property placeholder. Now I am writing type message inside this the way it is written over here, and then we can connect this text area with this label box. Now how to do that? The value which I have passed for this for attribute of this label box, the same value I'm going to pass for the name attribute of this text area. Fine, so that's how you can connect this text area with this label box over here. Once you are done with that, you can close the text area and also define the end tag for this text area because it is a container tag. Now as you can see, a text area is visible to us over here on this stage area, right? Okay, now besides this text area, what else do we have? We have two buttons, okay, one for sending the message and one for closing this chat pop-up window. So let's define the required HTML code for these two buttons. So I am again making use of this button named tag. Okay, and this time the type is going to be submit. Why? Just because if the user will hit this button, I would like whatever he has typed over here, it should get submitted. Fine, on this form. So for doing that, we can define this submit type for this button. Now we can also define a class for this button. So this is the class which is going to help us in customizing the view of this button. So what I would like to get reflected on the head of this button, it is send which is getting reflected over here. That is the reason I have written send after this code, and let's now close the button tag. Okay, so done with defining the required code for this send button. Now let's define the code for the second button which is getting reflected on this pop-up chat window, and that is for closing this pop-up chat window. You know, if you'll hit this button, automatically the window will go disappear. Why is it happening? Just because, you know, it is, if you're clicking on this button, some function is being called. Fine. So for this button, we need to define a function with which we can close this pop-up chat window. That's what we are going to do now. So let's make use of this tag named button for this close button also. And then what type of button I would like to have? I would like to have a button type of button. Okay, and then class, we can keep the same class what we have defined for this send button over here. So it is going to be btn, and let's make it, okay, let's make it btn cancel, because this is in green color and this one is in red color. So that is the reason I have defined two different classes for these two buttons. Fine. Okay, now I would like, when the user will hit this cancel button, some function should be called up. So let's define the name of a function. So I would like to call this function named close form. Okay, the code of this function we are going to define afterwards. Don't worry about that. Let's now define the text which we would like to see on the top of this button. So it is close, which is getting reflected over here. Let's write down close over here, and then we need to define the closing tag for this button element, right? Okay, so we are done with defining the required HTML code, and as you can see, all the components, all the required components are visible to us over here on the stage area. Okay, let's now define the required CSS code for customizing the appearance of this beautiful web page. So the first thing that I would like to define is the CSS code for the body section. So I would like to first customize the font family of all the components. So let's have this font family, Arial, for all the components. Now as you can see, all the text over here is getting reflected in Arial font. Okay, then we can, let's place an asterisk and define the box sizing. So I would like to have a border box kind of box sizing. Okay, now let's define the code for this class. Where is that? Open button class. This is for chat, and then this one is for open button. Yeah, so let's define the required CSS code for customizing this button, which the user will get to see initially when he will come on this beautiful web page. So this is the button which we are going to define the CSS code for now. Over here on the stage area, this is the one for which we have defined this class named open button over here in this HTML document. So let's access the class. So the method we need, the syntax that we need to keep in mind for accessing this class named open button on this CSS file is this. We need to first write down the name of the class, which is open button, and just before this class name we need to place a dot. Okay, let's now define the background color first. So I would like to have a background color of what is the background color of this button? In order to check out the color code of the background color of that button, we can make use of the color picker tool, which you can easily find in the game lab environment of code.org. So let's open this game lab environment. So once you're done with accessing the game lab environment, you need to come on this animation workspace of this environment, and then you can hit this new animation tab. After that, you can make use of this draw your own option, and automatically a beautiful empty frame is going to get created like this. Now we can take the snapshot of this page and paste it over here on this empty frame by using the shortcut keys Ctrl and V together. Fine, so this is what you're going to see. Okay, that button is not visible to us right now. Fine, no problem. Let's do one thing. Let's make use of this paint software, and here I am going to paste that print screen, that snapshot again. Let's now make use of this selection tool and select this button and paste it over here on this frame of game lab. So this is a button. Now in order to check out the background color of this button, we can make use of this color picker tool, and then we can hit this, we can click on this button. Automatically the code of this background color of this button is going to come here inside this text input box. So let's copy it from here, and we are now going to put it over here for this background color. Okay, now when you refresh this window, you will be able to see the changes getting reflected over here on the stage area. Now what is the color of the text of this button? So chat is getting reflected in white color. Let's make use of this color property and pass this value white so that we can see this chat getting reflected in white over here. Now as you can see, there is some space in between this text and the borders of this button. How can we create this kind of space? So if you want to create a space, some space inside a component, you can make use of this padding property. And let's define a space of 16 pixels by 20 pixels. I think it will do. Okay. Now what else do we need to define the CSS code for? So if I'm bringing this cursor over this button, so it is changing to a pointer kind of thing. Okay, how can we make it happen over here on this stage area? So what we can do, we can make use of this property named cursor, and we can pass this value named pointer for this cursor. Now when you'll bring the mouse over this button, you will be able to see the changes. See, now the cursor is changing to a pointer kind of thing. Okay, and besides that, when you're bringing this cursor over this button, the opacity of the background color is also changing. The transparency is changing. So we can define some opacity also, because it is somewhat light, right? So opacity is going to be 0.8. Let's make it 0.8. Okay, so now it is somewhat like this. We will define the code, required code for the hover property afterwards. Okay, right now we have just set the opacity for the background color of this button. Now I would like to see it in a fixed position. So let's define a fixed position for this button, and besides that, I would like to see in the bottom 23 pixels. So at this point I would like to see it. Fine. So as you can see, the position of this button has now changed, and it has changed just because of this code which I have defined over here. Okay, this one. Now let's define the code for this property named right 28 pixels. Let's pass 28 pixels for this. So this is what you will get to see. So now the button is getting reflected in the right side on the stage area. Okay, and as you can see, the width of this button is somewhat more as in comparison to the width of this one. So how can we play with the width of the button? We can make use of this width property, and let's define a width of 280 pixels for this button. So as you can see, we are able to now get this kind of button over here on the stage area. So it is perfectly fine. Okay, let's now define the required code for customizing the view of this division class inside which we have defined the whole form. Okay, so how can we access this division class? With the help of this chat pop-up class, we can easily access everything whatever we have defined inside this division section. So let's do it quickly. So for accessing that class, first of all we need to place a dot, and after that we need to write down the name of the class, which is chat popup. Let me create some space over here in the bottom. Yeah, now it is fine. So I would like to first fix the position. So that is the reason I'm defining this value fixed for this position property. Let's define something for the bottom also. So passing 0 value for this bottom field. So everything is now going to come in the bottom. See? Fine, everything is now shifted in the bottom over here. Okay, now besides that, let's make everything float in the right side. So we can make use of this right property, and let's pass a value somewhere around 15 pixels. So this is what now you will get to see over here. So everything is coming in the bottom, and this chat, this message, this text area, everything is floating in the right side of the stage area. Let's define a border also for the pop-up. So I would like to have a border of 3 pixels, and it should be a solid border. Okay, and color of the border should be this. Done with defining the required CSS code for this chat pop-up class. Okay, now let's define the code for this class that we have defined for this form over here. So how can we access this class? We can copy this whole thing, and now we can place a dot first, and after that we can paste the name of the class we have defined over here. So it is form container, right, which we have defined over here. Let's do one thing. Let's place a dash also in between this form and container. Now it is perfectly fine. Okay, now let's make use of some CSS code in order to customize the appearance of the components which are there inside this form container class. So the first thing that I would like to do is, let's define a maximum width for the form. So the maximum width should be 300 pixels. You know why I'm defining 300 pixels over here? Just because the form is covering a very small space of this window. Okay, it is near about 300 pixels only. That is the reason I've defined 300 pixels for this maximum width. And then let's define a padding. Why I'm defining padding? Because we are able to see some space in between these components and the form border over here. So let's make use of this padding property for having some space in between the components and the form border. Now what is the background color of this form? So it is in white. Okay, so for defining the background color, we can make use of background color property, and let's pass this value white for this background color. Now let's refresh this window and see what is the output we are going to get. So this is how right now the pop-up box is getting reflected over here. Okay, fine. Now let's define the required code for customizing the appearance of uh, this text area. Okay, now how can we access this text area? So it is coming inside this class named form container. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the name of this class over here, and then for accessing the text area which is coming inside this class, we can write down text area. So now this platform is going to read it is going to access a text area which is coming inside, which we have defined inside this class name. Okay, and whatever properties we are going to define over here inside these two curly brackets, those properties will be applicable only on this text area over here. So I would like to first define some width for the text area. I would like to see it always covering the entire width. So that is the reason passed 100% for this width property. Let's now define something for the padding part also. So I would like to define a padding of 15 pixels. Why? Because I want to see some spacing in between this text and this button and the border of this, in between this placeholder field and the border of this text area. That is the reason I've defined this padding over here. And here also, the changes are visible to us. See? Okay, let's now define something for the margin part. So margin should be 5 pixels on the top, 0 in the right, and then 22 pixels in the bottom and 0 in the left. Okay, so done with getting the required changes over here. Now for getting a suitable background, we can make use of this background property, and let's define this color for the background of this text. Fine, so everything is being reflected over here. See? Now minimum height, let's define the minimum height also for this text area. So it should be at least 200 pixels always. Okay, so now it is perfectly fine. See, this is how this pop-up chat window is looking at present. Now let's define the code for this thing. If I am hitting this text area, or if I am clicking on this text area, the background color of the text area is changing. How can we get this kind of result? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to access the text area. So I'm going to make use of this same code which I've made use of over here for accessing the text area, and let's paste it over here. Now what is happening if I am focusing on this text area? So the background color of this text area is changing. So that's what I'm going to define the code for over here now. So let's make use of this property named focus. So now if you will focus or will click inside the text area, so I would like you guys to see the background color of the text area changing to now what is the color code of this background color which is getting reflected at present over here. So let's make use of this print screen option and paste the screenshot over here. Now I am going to make use of this selection tool. Let's select this text area and paste it here in the game lab. To find out the color code of this text area, we just have to select the color picker tool and click on this text area, and this is the code which is for the color which is getting reflected at present over here on this chat window. Okay, so let's define this color over here. Fine, and then let's refresh the stage area and check out whether we will be able to get the required result with the help of this code or not. So if I will hit this text area, the color is changing. Yes, so I am getting the required output. Right. Now let's define the required code for customizing the appearance of this button named send. How can we access this button? So we can access it with the help of this class named btn. Now what I am going to do, I'm going to place a dot, then let's write down the name of the class we have defined for this send button. So what is the background color of the send button? Let's find it out first. So I'm done with hitting the print screen button. Let's now paste it over here, and using the selection tool I am going to select both the buttons. Let's select both the buttons and paste them over here in the game lab. Fine. Now with the help of this color picker tool, let's check out the color code of this button, the background color of this button. So this is the color code of this button. Fine. Now making use of this background color property, we can definitely change the background color of this button. See, so the background color which we are able to see over here is this. So it's somewhat green right now. Okay, now what is the color of the text? So it is white. Let's make use of this color property and define this value white for the same. Let's have something for the padding part also. So 16 pixels and 20 pixel. Then we would like the cursor also to change to a pointer like thing when the user will bring the cursor on these buttons. So if you'll refresh this window, you will be able to see the changes over here. So when I'm bringing my cursor on these buttons, so it is now changing to a pointer kind of thing. I would like the button to cover the entire width, so 100%, and then we can define something for the margin bottom part. Why I'm making use of this field? Just because there's some space in between these two buttons. So this space, if you want to create this space which we are able to see below the send button, so for that you can make use of this margin bottom property. Let's define a space of 10 pixels. So now when you refresh this window, this is what you will get to see. So there is some space which we are able to see now in between these two buttons. Okay, and let's now define the opacity also. So opacity is going to be 0.8. Fine, so it is now light green kind of color which is getting visible over here, which is visible to us over here on these buttons, right? But the background color of this cancel or close button is red, right? So how can we make the background color of this close button red? So first thing that we have to do is we need to check the class we have made use of over here for accessing for this button named close. So there are two classes I have defined over here for this button named close, and those two classes are, one is btn and then the second one is cancel. So what we can do, we can make use of the second class, okay, to change the background color of this close button to red. So let's define red over here. As you can see, now the changes are getting reflected over here on the stage area. Fine. So this our pop-up chat window is ready now. Let's now define the code for the hover part. What is happening when I am bringing my cursor over this button, its transparency is changing. Similarly, if I'm bringing my cursor over these two buttons, their transparency is also changing. Now how can you get this kind of effect, or how can you get this kind of output? So for that, first of all, we need to write down the code with which we can access all the three buttons. So all the three buttons are present in this class named form container, right? So the first thing that I am doing is I'm going to write down the name of this form container class, and let's now write down the name of the class in which this first button is present, which is btn, right? And then we can define this hover property for this btn class, place a comma, and then you can define the name of the class in which this button is coming, this button, chat button. Let's check out the name of the class. So it is there. Where is that button? Chat. Okay, this is the one, and for this button we have defined this class named open dash button. So let's copy it from here, and I am pasting it over here. So dot open button, and again hover is the property for which I would like to define the CSS code for. Okay, and now we can put these two curly brackets. Let's define the opacity of 0.1 for all these buttons. Now when you will refresh this window, so this is what you'll get to see. Okay, so it is disappearing completely. Let's do one thing, let's change it to 1. I think this will give us the correct output. Yes, now it is perfectly fine. So this is what you will get to see after defining this code for the hover property. So I'm done with defining the HTML as well as CSS code. Now let's run this web page on a browser. So this is the link which we can make use of for accessing the web page we have just designed. Fine. Now I don't want that, when the user will come on this web page, initially this chat window should be visible to the user. Now how can we hide this chat window? That's what we have to think. So for hiding the chat window, let's go back on this CSS code, and this is the one, this is the CSS code with which this form over here is getting created. Now if you will define the display for this as none, so now the chat, when you refresh this stage area, the chat window will not be visible to you anymore. Let's set this share button to get the link, and now I am going to use this link for accessing the web page we have designed. So at present that chat window is not visible to us over here on this web page. Now if you will hit this chat button which we have placed right at the bottom, we will not be able to see that chat window. Why? Because we haven't defined any JavaScript coding for these functions which we have defined for these buttons. Okay, so there is one function which we have defined for this button, for which the class name is open button, and then there is one function which we have defined for the closing button. Okay, so the name of the function for this gray button over here is open form. So this, I would like the browser to call this function if the user will hit this button over here. Now how these things are going to happen, and how the chat window will come in front of the user, that's what we have to think and define the code for. So now I am going to access the console panel first on this web browser, and then I am going to define the required JavaScript coding with which I can get the required output. So for accessing the console panel, we need to press Ctrl Shift and J together. Remember the shortcut, Ctrl Shift and J. These are the three keys. When you will press them together, this is the window which is going to open. Okay, let's hit this clear console button to clear everything. Fine. Now there are two functions for which we have to define the code for. The first function is open form. Let's define the code for this one first. Now in JavaScript, what happens if you want to define a function? So this is the keyword you guys can make use of for defining a function of your own. Function is a keyword. Okay, remember this thing. Now the name of the function over here which we have defined for this button, this gray button, is open form. Let's copy this function name and paste it over here. Okay, now let's define the required code inside this function. Sorry, just a second, let me copy it again and paste it over here. Fine. Now I am going to access this document. Now how to access this document over here? So for accessing the document, you just have to write down this keyword document, and this, with the help of this keyword, you will be able to access all the elements which are there currently visible to us over here on this web page. Okay, now I would like to get this component with the help of its ID. So what is the ID I have defined over here for this chat pop-up window? The ID which I have defined for this chat pop-up window is my form. So for accessing this form over here, inside which, you know, the label box, the text area, and the two buttons, send and close, are there. For accessing this form, we are going to make use of this my form ID. Now what you have to do, you have to make use of this property, get element by ID. Okay, so this, with the help of this property, you can access the element, you can access the HTML element with the help of the ID you have defined for it. So just because I want to access this division section, that is the reason I am making use of this ID I have defined for it over here in this HTML document. So let's now define this ID my form. Okay, and then I would like to style it. So for styling it, we can make use of this style keyword. Fine. And what kind of display you would like to see? So I would like to see everything in a block kind of display. So equal to, you can place block like this, and then you can place semicolon and close the curly bracket. Now when you will hit the enter button, and now when you will hit this chat button over here, why nothing is happening? Just a second. Open form, everything is correctly defined. Why I am not able to access that form? Okay, this is open form, and then this one is closed form, and this one is open form. No problem. Let's do one thing. Let's define the code for that closed form also. So the only thing that we have to do is we need to copy this and paste it over here. Change the name of the function to close form, because for this close button over here, okay, for that red button, the function that we would like the browser to call is this close form. Okay, so that is the reason I've changed the name of the function to close form. What kind of display I would like to see? I would like to see nothing getting reflected over here. So the window should completely go down. Let's see whether we'll be able to get the required output or not with the help of this code. Okay, I am not able to see anything over here. Why is it so? Let's copy this whole thing, and I'm pasting it over here inside the notepad file. I'm copying this thing also and pasting it over here. Let's refresh this web page, and now I am going to write down this whole code again over here in this console panel. Now why we are not able to see the changes happening? That's what we have to check out. So when the user will hit this on click, so this is the function which will be called up. Now is there anything which we are missing over here? Open form, this is perfectly fine. Chat, okay. Open button, then this is my form. We are accessing everything with the help of my form. Let me check it one more time. So if I will replace it with, so it is my form, and M is in small and F is in capital, right? And what do we have over here? For this one we have this my form, okay, and okay, the spelling of display is not correct. That is the reason we are not able to see the output. Let's do one thing. Let's make the required changes. I think now we will be able to get the desired result. Fine. So now this JavaScript coding is currently running over here. Fine. Let's now hit this button and see whether the pop-up window is going to appear on this beautiful web page or not. Yes, the pop-up window is there. Okay, now if you want to close this pop-up window, you just have to hit this close button. Yes, it is closing also. You know what is happening when I'm hitting this chat button over here? So the browser is calling this function, and what is the code that we have defined for this function? We have defined this code, with which we are accessing this element my form. Okay, it means that we are accessing this division inside which this form is there. Fine, and then we have defined a certain display for that whole form, for this form, and that display is block. So it is appearing in a block kind of thing right now, and if you'll hit this close button, if we are hitting this close button, what is happening? The window is disappearing. Why? Just because the display over here is none for this function close form. So that's how you can make use of this HTML, CSS and JavaScript coding together to design this beautiful pop-up chat window. Hope you guys enjoyed this lecture a lot. Do like and share this video in your group so that it can reach to the maximum students possible. And also do ask your friends to join this channel on which we are providing free coding classes. Thank you very much for joining me in this tutorial. Have a great day. Bye-bye.